So today we're going to turn our attention to solutions. In particular, we'll focus on the cross-cutting solutions that promote health and foster equity together. We'll highlight policy and community-based interventions to slow climate change and to protect the health and well-being of all North Carolinians from these climate change impacts. I'm therefore honored to be able to introduce this afternoon's first speaker, Senator DeAndrea Salvador. Senator Salvador represents State Senate District 39, the southwestern corner of Mecklenburg County, and is a proud fifth-generation Charlottean. Very good. While earning a degree in economics from UNC Charlotte's Belk College of Business, Senator Salvador interned with the Electric Power Research Institute, a premier think tank working on the energy industry's toughest issues. Shortly after college, she founded the Renewable Energy Transition Initiative, or READY, to help battle energy poverty among low-income families and advocate for Charlotte's Sustainable Energy Action Plan to include energy efficient and affordable homes in Charlotte's North End. She also served on the Mecklenburg County Air Quality Commission for 3 years and brings her expertise to Clean Air Carolina's Board of Directors, where she currently helps lead the board's policy committee. Senator Salvador is a 2018 TED Talks Fellow, and she's been recognized among the under 30 by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Black Chamber of Commerce and was a recipient of the UNC Charlotte Young Alumna of the Year Award. While only in her first term in the State Senate, I think it's fair to say that we can expect her to do some great things at the intersection of energy, environmental health, and equity. Please join me in welcoming Senator DeAndrea Salvador.
Thank you so much, Kim, for that really gracious introduction. And thank you to all the attendees, as well as June, for inviting me to be here today. I have to say, when June gave me the incredibly daunting task of talking about what has occurred over the last 3 months and 5 minutes, I didn't quite know where to begin. But I guess first I'll just share just a quick bit about me, and that's that I was recently elected. So this is my first term in the State Senate, and it's been as much of a learning process for me as really any constituent might have if they were learning about the legislative process here in North Carolina. So I'll do a really quick primer. It was really interesting to me to see the somewhat slow start for some of our environmental legislation moving forward. So right now, both the Senate and the House are on a quote unquote spring break. So we're not having any committees, we're not having any voting sessions. And why that's important is because once we return next week, things are expected to really start to pick up. I am really fortunate that I can serve on committees that allow me to play into some of my skill sets or experiences and really some of my passion areas. Not to go deep into my nonprofit background, but environmental justice is a very big concern of mine, and it's something is a lens that I want to keep moving forward. So I serve on the Agriculture, Energy, Environmental Committee, as well as the Appropriations for Agriculture and Natural and Economic Resources. So those are 2 committees that I had a huge interest in, and I feel incredibly privileged to serve on. So we haven't had a lot of bills that have gone through committee for the agriculture, energy, and environment. And many of them that did go through our committee were largely non-controversial, perhaps with the exception of Senate Bill 211, which changed the rate-making mechanism for water utilities. However, that still was not like a big groundwork of energy, water, air legislation. So as I mentioned, really once things return next week, that's when to keep a very solid eye on what's happening in Raleigh. One of the other important things is that there is a different deadline between the Senate and the House. So in the Senate, our filing deadline is today. So essentially all of the legislation, with the exception of some appropriation legislation that will be filed in the long session, will be filed by the end of today at 4 p.m. So you'll know essentially what is coming out of the Senate for this cycle. The House has a little bit more time. They have about 3 additional weeks before they have to file. So there is a bit more time to keep an eye on the House. But in terms of the Senate, now is a really great time to peruse through on the North Carolina Legislature's website and see what has been proposed. I'll say in the last day or so alone, I've personally seen well over 100 bills, maybe closer to 150 that I'm trying to go through and get deep understanding of. So as I mentioned, really when we come back, that the process is expected to really take off. One of the big things every biennium, of course, is the budget. So just a couple years ago, just a couple weeks ago, the governor put out his proposed budget for the upcoming cycle. And I was really pleased to see that there is a heavy focus both on environmental justice as well as clean energy. So he proposed over $95 million over the biennium to advance clean energy development in the clean energy economy, including dollars for our schools, but also about $25 million for low-income assistance with clean energy in his plan. So as we start the budget process, that's something that is certainly helpful to encourage your representatives to keep an eye on, to support, to make sure that it stays a priority, whether that is with clean energy or air or water or whatever your passion area is. The budget really is an evidence of our priorities. So it's really essential as we go through the budget process that we're keeping our priorities front and center so that great work can continue to get done and be catalyzed even further. One important thing that I want to mention that kind of ties into those bill filing deadlines will be, we're expecting a major piece of legislation to come out of the House that will touch on energy, possibly utility reform to some degree, similar to the multi-year rate making legislation that we've seen with the water utilities. I personally have not seen any language, but I am aware of the stakeholder conversations that are happening in the House and trying to keep a close eye. But I will just say that that is something that I encourage all stakeholders to be ready to address. Hopefully it is a good piece of legislation, but if it's not, we need to make sure that, one, as legislators, we're as informed as possible. So if you have an expertise in terms of a particular element of the bill, please definitely use your voice, but also that we can create amendments or stop any legislation that we feel will be a detriment to communities from going through. So again, I haven't seen any language. I certainly like to hope for the best, but I think it's something that we should absolutely keep an eye on and make sure that we're doing everything we can to, by the end of this long session, have as much good policy helping our communities as possible. So that, I think that kind of hits most of my 5 minutes, but I definitely encourage folks to look at the General Assembly website. I personally introduced some legislation surrounding Energy Resilience Act. We've introduced reinstating the Renewable Energy Tax Credit, a Clean Water Act, appliance standards. There's a number of environmental leaning legislation that has been put forth. So I'm happy to also answer questions at another time. I don't think we're doing a Q&A for this, but just wanted to give a quick update about some of the things that I'm seeing as a first-term senator in Raleigh.
Well, thank you so much, Senator Salvador, for those remarks. We're so grateful to you that you took the time to be with us today, and look forward to working with you to continue to advance energy equity and climate justice. We appreciate your work.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Now we're going to hear from the next generation of researchers, those who are elucidating the links between environmental health, equity, and climate change. Dr. Mary Clare Hano is a social scientist with the EPA and will introduce the graduate student speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Price, and also thank you, Senator Salvador. Yes, my name is Mary Clare Hano, and I'm happy to be here. I'm a social scientist at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in the Office of Research and Development. And today I have the pleasure and honor of introducing 3 students who submitted abstracts and posters as part of the poster presentation session for the conference. And these students were selected among all of the submissions to share their research as part of this lightning talk session. And so first we have Brandon Lewis, who is a current graduate student in the Department of Marine, Earth, and Atmospheric Sciences at North Carolina State University. And so I will hand it over to Brandon and look forward to hearing more about your research.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Get started. Share. Okay. Let's see if I can get it to play. Oh. Okay. So again, thank you. My name is Brandon Lewis. So thank you for viewing my presentation and my research on the modeling and analysis of air pollution, health risk, and environmental justice. And this is the case for North Carolina's hog concentrated animal feeding operation. So I'll do kind of a short overview of my research. So first, I would like to do just a quick introduction to my research. So again, I'm looking at these concentrated animal feeding operations. So specifically hog farms. So in North Carolina, herds around millions of hogs at one time. And we know that these hogs produce tons of waste annually. This waste is stored and treated in these storage units called lagoons, which are basically kind of pits in the ground. This waste can also be applied onto these agricultural fields and sprayed and used as fertilizer. So now we kind of have these 2 sources of, two emission sources. So one is from the farms directly, and they can emit pollutants through their ventilation system. And this waste can also emit pollutants directly through a process called volatilization. And so as we have these pollutants that are emitted, they increase the amount of air pollution that's in the atmosphere. So they increase the ambient concentration of these toxic air pollutants. So for my research, I'm looking at specifically gases. So ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and other volatile organic compounds. And we know from previous research that at high enough concentrations that these toxic gases can be harmful to the environment and cause, negative human health effects, including respiratory ailments and cardiovascular illnesses. And they can also degrade, the quality of life. Hydrogen sulfide produces an odor, and having these hog farms around the community also decreases the property value. And so when you have certain community members that are targeted, then you have kind of an environmental justice issue, where you have groups, like one group that I work with, the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, that advocate for these communities. And we're also able to come together to these meetings and conferences to try to find solutions. And so I would quickly like to go into the method of what I use to estimate, some pollutants from these hog farms. So I used the human exposure model, HIM3, to estimate ambient concentrations. I looked at 2 gases, ammonia and hydrogen sulfide, and I also analyzed human exposures, and I looked at these hog farms within Duplin County. So Duplin County is located on the eastern side of North Carolina. And yesterday, I know we briefly mentioned Sampson County, so it's right adjacent to Sampson County. And here within Duplin County, they actually house around 484 hog farms, which is a lot, and you can see it plotted here on the bottom right, just throughout Duplin County, these points. So once I found these ambient concentrations of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide, I paired this to look at exposures and see how these pollutants differ by race, ethnicity, age, income, linguistic isolation, and that's when no one over the age of 14 speaks English fluently. So this is linguistic isolation is mainly the Hispanic population and educational attainment, where I looked at adults without a high school diploma. So now I want to go into kind of my concentration maps. So on the left side, I have ammonia, and on the right side, I have hydrogen sulfide. So these are my estimated concentrations from these hog farms within Duplin County. So the max ammonia concentration is 51.67 micrograms per meter cubed. And here, just my ammonia map, we see kind of these hot spots in the northern part of Duplin County and the western side of Duplin County. And you kind of see the same pattern for hydrogen sulfide in the northern and the western side of Duplin County, with the max being 0.52 micrograms of hydrogen sulfide per meter cubed. Then next, I want to go into my exposure assessment among these vulnerable groups. So I have this graph here that shows the vulnerable groups that I looked at the bottom, and I'm looking at the percent difference in exposure. So the percent difference in exposure from the average Duplin County resident. And so here, just taking a look at this graph, in my results, we see that the linguistically isolated population, or Hispanic population, experience around 105% more exposure than the average Duplin County resident, where we see adults without a high school diploma experience around 45% more exposure, minority around 25% more exposure, and low income around 20% more exposure. So just a brief summary of my research that I estimated ambient concentrations of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide. I found above average exposures of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide for the linguistically isolated communities, minorities, communities of low income in Duplin County, and communities of adults without a high school diploma. And on average, I also saw that in these areas where we have these vulnerable populations, as the vulnerable populations increase within these areas, so do the concentrations tend to increase of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide. So there's kind of a collective awareness that we need to address public health and environmental impacts from these hog farms and the resulting air pollution. So if you have any questions, my email is in Hoover, and thank you for being my presentation.
Thank you, Brandon. That was great to hear your excellent work, and we look forward to reading more about it in the future, and seeing more of the work that you're doing related to environmental health and environmental justice in North Carolina. Up next, we have Sterling Brown. Sterling is a graduate student in environmental, earth, and geospatial sciences at North Carolina Central University, and he will share his recent work on traffic-induced particulate matter exposure and assessment of its impacts on health disparity in minority communities.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen really quick. So a bit of background information. Particulate matter exposure has been linked to cardio and pulmonary diseases, but this exposure is not uniform across ethnic groups. So what my project aims to do is to see if there's a discrepancy between the particulate matter exposure between low minority communities and higher minority communities. So in terms of how we selected our sampling locations, what we did was we looked at ICD 9 and 10 codes. This is just a book of causes of death for different people that's tied to zip code unit. So from this data, along with census data from that's readily available online, we were able to map out our areas of high minority population and low minority population. So within these two areas, we deployed PEM units and purple air monitors. So PEM units are used to pull PM 2.5 out of the air in real time, while purple air monitors are used to constantly monitor the particulate matter in the air. So from the particulate matter that we collected, we then isolated it from Teflo filters. The process of this is take the filters and we sonicate them in a solution of 80% ethanol and 20% water. From this solution, we take it and centrifuge it at 8,000 RPM for 30 minutes. We then let the sample dry out and then reconstitute it in growth media to be ready for exposure to cells. So from our results, what we found was that our low minority population, which is North Durham or north of Highway 147, they received a daily average PM 2.5 level of 39.4 micrograms per meter cube. And our high minority population that's south of Highway 147 received a daily average of 101.4 micrograms per meter cube. So, and moving on, this is from PM data that was collected from indoor sources. What we're seeing is PM 2.5 has a concentration dependent effect on the amount of nitrate that's produced. Additionally, PM 2.5 exposure has been shown to have a concentration dependent effect on weakening the plasma membrane of cells. And this moves on to cause higher viable cell loss. However, this isn't really concentration dependent, as once the particulate matter was exposed at different concentrations, we saw about equal amounts of cell death from indoor exposure groups. So moving on to our outdoor exposure groups, what we found is that there's a concentration dependent apoptotic reaction from A549 cells from PM 2.5 that was isolated from South Durham, so our high minority population area. We have seen a weak correlation between concentration and viable cell loss due to necrosis from Calu-3 cell loss from North and South Durham. So really quick, Calu-3 cells are lung cells that make up the bronchial tubes of your upper airway, and A549 cells make up the basal layer of the alveolar sacs in your lower respiratory system. And moving on, what we also found was that there is not that strong a correlation between necrosis death in A549 cells from South Durham exposure. However, we did see a lot of cell death around the 1/2 dilution mark. So in conclusion, the PM 2.5 that we've isolated from indoor origins has a concentration dependent free radical generation effect and a higher cell toxicity effect. PM that was isolated from traffic sources has an induced apoptotic effect that is concentration dependent, but more so than a necrotic effect. In our 1 week long period of sampling, we found that the ambient PM 2.5 levels in minority communities were about twice as high as in non-minority communities. What we believe the reason for this is proximity to major highways, as well as traffic volume on those highways themselves. Additionally, what we want to do moving forward is to conduct inflammatory response studies to see if the cells that are alive are producing higher amounts of inflammatory cytokines. And thank you.
Thank you, Sterling. That was really great to hear more about your research. And so far we've heard about two different aspects of air quality and air pollution concerns related to environmental justice. And now we'll switch and zoom out a little bit to Maurica Bynum, who is currently pursuing her doctorate in public health at East Carolina University. And she will share some of her current research on a meta-synthesis of environmental justice topics in North Carolina from 1965 to 2021. Maurica?
Okay, thank you so much. I'll share my screen, just give me 1 second. And here we go. All right, so my project is a meta-synthesis of these environmental justice topics in North Carolina, and it's in collaboration with Dr. Kearney, Dr. Bailey, and Dr. King at East Carolina University. So environmental justice is defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And this comes from the EPA. The picture that you see, it's from Warren County, the birthplace of the environmental justice movement. And protesters were so adamant that they would lay in the street to prevent this dumping of toxic PCB in their community. So our project aimed to perform a systematic review because we could not find a compilation of environmental justice topics for North Carolina, even though this is the birthplace of the movement. So we wanted to make sure that we found out which issues were most frequently published, key time periods, and the named locations or the named regions of North Carolina for the research. In this systematic review, it yielded over 15,000 articles originally, and after screening and removing the duplicates and ensuring that we had full text articles and research, we ended up with a total of 41 studies. And the results were rather interesting. So we found that there were no articles published between 1965 and 1994. So we started our chart at 1991 to 2000 time period, but published articles increased as time moved on, with the most frequent publishing being from the 2011 to 2021 time period. And by far, the most frequently published topic relating to environmental justice were CAFOs. There were some other topics like solid waste, water, pesticides, and the Wilmington bypass came up as well. So for figure 2, we tried a different method. We wanted to take keywords, and I got these keywords from the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, that these were issues facing North Carolina. And we took all of the articles that we found in the gray literature and conducted a count of how often these words appeared in these articles. And the largest word is the most frequent appearing word, and the smallest one is the least frequently appearing word. So here we have environment as the most frequently appearing keyword in the article. And also we wanted to map how the areas of environmental justice issues. So in cases where the whole state of North Carolina was not referenced in the study, I went and selected the regions and the counties that were most referenced. So as you can see, the western part of the state is rather blank, and the eastern part of the state has been filled in. So our key findings were, we found more published gray literature than scholarly literature. We also found that CAFOs was the overwhelming majority of environmental justice issues in North Carolina, but it also meant the region of Eastern North Carolina was the most referenced due to the presence of CAFOs in the state. We also did a count, and environment was cited almost 1,500 times. Justice was the next most frequent keyword, and North Carolina was also right beneath that. And most of the research that's focusing on Western North Carolina is lacking. And as I mentioned before, the published literature didn't start until the 1991 to 2000 time period. So what does this mean for us? Well, the lack of published literature could indicate that historical moments have not been documented. It doesn't mean they didn't happen, we just don't have any published record of it. And the absence of environmental justice issues in the western part of the state could possibly be misleading. There may just be a research gap that needs to be filled. And also, we wanted this project to increase awareness of environmental justice issues and educate marginalized communities and reduce environmental impacts. And we're hoping that these research efforts can help support policy change and ensure environmental equity for all North Carolinians. So if you have any questions or comments for me, please feel free to reach out to me. My information is on Whova, and I've also left it here at the bottom of the screen. So thank you so much, and bye-bye.
Thank you, Maurica. And now I will hand it back to Dr. Price, who will facilitate and lead us to the next session. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you to Maurica, Sterling, and Brandon for your excellent work and your compelling research. We really appreciate you sharing with us. Now it's time to go back to the agenda and Whova for our next speaker, Marilyn Marsh Robinson with the Environmental Defense Fund. So we'll be closing out this webinar, and you'll be able to go to the agenda and Whova for the next webinar, which will start at 1:40. So thank you all. I hope you're enjoying it. Take a deep breath, some time to breathe between sessions, and I'll see you in the next session.